Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So right now, we want to learn about absolute value equations. So our goal is then to understand the meaning of absolute value and also be able to solve absolute value equations. So first off, let's take a look at absolute value. So the absolute value of a number, any number, is its distance from zero. So let's take a look at a few examples. Okay, let's think about the number 5. Or actually, let me back up and say, think about both 5 and -5. So here's 0, here's 5, here's -5. Okay. Now, if we talk about the absolute value of 5, and the way we indicate that is these two bars like this. Okay. So that is the distance of 5 from 0. Okay. And we know, of course, this is 5 units, distance of 5 from 0. Okay. But also in the same way, think about -5, its distance from 0 is also 5 units. So the absolute value of 5 is actually the same as the absolute value of -5, which is just 5. It's 5 units from 0. Okay, that's what absolute value means. The number is distance from 0. So regardless of what the sign is, whether positive or negative, it's how far it is from 0. So when you use that idea and talking about absolute value equation, let's look at a basic one. Okay, let's look at an example before we actually work some examples. Let's look at this one. The absolute value of x equals 5. So we call something an absolute value equation because the unknown thing, what we're looking for, the variable, is inside the absolute value bars. So we want to find our solutions or numbers going to make this a true statement. Okay. So if you think about that and what we just did, then we draw a number line, basically kind of drawing the same number line we did before. Looking for numbers that have a distance from 0 is 5. So what this kind of literally says is x is 5 units from 0. That's kind of what the statement says. Okay. Looking for numbers and make that true. Of course, we know 1 is 5. That's 5 units from 0. But as we saw previously, an example we did before, -5 is also 5 units from 0. Okay. So all this tells us x, whatever it is 5 units from 0. So then our solutions, we have 2, make it true. X is equal to -5 and x is equal to 5. Okay. Sometimes you might also see this written as in set notation as a couple of squiggly brackets with these numbers in between. So -5 and 5. Now here, the squiggly brackets don't mean, unlike an interval, this is not an interval. Okay, an interval we use either parentheses or brackets, regular brackets, square brackets. The squiggly brackets just mean we just have a set or collection of numbers. This just means two numbers, -5 and 5. Okay, so that's our solution to that equation. So let's take a look over here on the left, and here's our basic procedure for solving absolute value equations. So, and we'll see some basically have the same form, but we'll kind of be a little more complex, have a little more going on. So get the absolute value part by itself. We'll see some examples where that's necessary. And then just as we did here, once we get the absolute value bar by itself, we put whatever's inside the absolute value equal to the number on the right and the negative value of the number on the right. Okay. Let's take a look at some of those examples. So let's go and do number 1 here. Let's just say we want to solve. So number 1, the absolute value of x plus 5 is equal to 9. Okay. So in a similar way, if we put it into words, this says that whatever x plus 5 is, its distance from 0 is 9. Okay. It's 9 units from 0. So then what we do then, if it's 9 units from 0, what that means is that either x plus 5 has to equal +9, or x plus 5 as equal to negative 9. That's the only way it can be 5 units from 0. Now we just solve each one of these. So subtract 5 from both sides. And so this is going to be x is equal to 4. Over here, subtract 5 from both sides. X is equal to negative 14. And those are our solutions. You plug those back in. Plug in 4 here for x. 4 plus 5 is 9. The absolute value of 9 would be 9. Plug in negative 14 here. Negative 14 and 5 would be negative 9. And the absolute value of negative 9 is also 9. Okay, so those are our solutions. Most absolute value problems, we have 2 solutions because we can have, in going along just one dimension, along a number line, there are usually 2 places where it would be the equal distance from 0. Okay, let's look at one where we have to get the absolute value part by itself. Okay, so number 2, say we have this 3 times the absolute value of 2x minus 1 minus 2 is equal to 16. Okay, now there's more going on here, but as we'll see, it works exactly the same way. So first, we want to make it look like this. We want to get the absolute value part by itself. I'm going to essentially solve for that. So I would do that first. So to get this part by itself, so first add 2 to both sides. So that then will give us 3 times 2x minus 1 is equal to 18 after adding 2. Now here, also one thing to mention, you can't distribute over an absolute value. So you can't make this 3 times each one of those. That doesn't work. So don't distribute over an absolute value. What we can do then is divide both sides by 3. So divide this side by 3 and this side by 3. To do that, what we're left with is the absolute value of 2x minus 1 is equal to 6. Okay, so now this problem looks like the one we just did. Okay, we have the absolute value of something is equal to 6. And so in the same way, its distance from 0 is 6. So that means that 2x minus 1 has equal either be positive 6 or 2x minus 1 has equal negative 6. And both those are distance of 6 from 0. Solve each equation then. Add 1 to both sides. We have 2x is equal to 7. Divide both sides by 2, then x is equal to 7/2, which doesn't reduce. Over here, add 1 to both sides. So we have 2x is equal to negative 5. Divide both sides by 2, x is equal to negative 5/2, which also doesn't reduce. So those are our 2 solutions. You plug in either one of those, will give you a true statement in the original equation. Okay, that's the idea. So basically, in most cases, we get the absolute value part by itself, and they have a number on it here on this side. So we usually set up 2 equations. What's inside equals the positive and negative values of what's on the right. Okay, but now let's take a look quickly at a couple examples where that doesn't work the same way, exactly as we expect. All right, first one, say we have this, the absolute value of 4 minus x is equal to 0. Okay, so in this case, the absolute value part is by itself. We don't have to worry with that. Okay, now in the same way, let's approach it the same way. And so we'd have 2 equations. The absolute distance of the x, this from is whatever this is from 0 is 0. Then we'd have 4 minus x is equal to positive 0, or 4 minus x is equal to negative 0. But if you remember, 0 isn't positive or negative, okay? 0 has no sign. It's not positive or negative. So both these are the same equation. So in this case, so we have only one equation because they both be the same equation. We have 4 minus x is equal to 0. And just solve this. So this is one of the rare cases where actually we only have one solution. Because it's equal to 0, distance from 0 is 0. So it kind of makes sense we only have 1. Just solve this. So subtract 4 from both sides. So negative x is equal to negative 4. And divide both sides by negative 1. Switch our sign, so x is equal to 4. In this case, that's our only solution. All right, let's look at our last one. The absolute value of x minus 11, look better. So x minus 11 in the absolute value is equal to -3. Now, once again, the absolute value part is by itself, but notice here, this is negative. Okay, so our absolute value is a distance. Is a distance from 0. And of course, as a distance can't be negative. The distance can't be negative. It can be either positive or 0, but it can't be negative. So what that means is what it means here, in this case, so we have no solution. Meaning there's no value of x I can plug in. It'll make this true. So in this case, there's no solution. Once again, absolute value is distance from 0. Is saying the distance from 0 would be a -3. It's not possible. So there's no solution, says there's nothing value of x I can plug in to make it true. Okay, so let's take a quick look at what we've seen. So just recall the absolute value is the distance from 0. An absolute value of a negative number or positive number, the same magnitude is the same, the absolute value. Then to solve an absolute value equation, we take whatever is on, once we get the absolute value part by itself, absolute value is equal to a positive number or 0. We set that equal to what's inside equal to positive and negative versions of that number. And then we solve, and then typically we have two solutions in absolute value equations. So that's how we take care of those. Thank you. Have a good day.